These are the 5 greatest chess players of all time. Let's begin by talking about the now infamous Paul Morphy, who was so good he quit chess because he had no competition. Paul Morphy was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1837. Paul was a prodigy, and around 8 years old, he taught himself how to play chess simply by watching. By the time he was 13, Paul was defeating master-level players and was already considered one of the best young talents in America. In 1857, he won the first American Chess Congress, becoming U.S. champion at just 20 years old. Following this success, Paul Morphy traveled to Europe to attempt to find the best chess players in the world. Some players were able to steal a game or two, but Paul Morphy still couldn't find any opponent consistently playing chess at his level. Morphy returned to the US after 2 short years as an international superstar who is now widely regarded as the greatest chess player of all time. However, after returning home, Morphy decided he would never play competitive chess again. His life became consumed by overwhelming paranoia and anxiety. During this time, Paul visited an old friend saying he desperately needed $200. The friend responded, "If you will play a game of chess with me, I will make it $250. Morphy agreed. He set up a chessboard and proceeded to allow his friend to win in just a few moves. "There," the former champion exclaimed, "I have done what you require, but the next time I play chess with you, I will give you the queen." He turned to leave. His friend called out, reminding him that he was forgetting his reward. "I will come for it tomorrow," Morphy promised. But he never did. His final years were spent isolated from the public before passing at just 47 years old on July 10, 1884. This rise and fall of an American chess prodigy is eerily similar to the story of Bobby Fischer. Robert James Fischer was born in Chicago in 1943. From an early age, it was clear that he possessed an extraordinary aptitude for the game of chess. At the age of 14, Fischer became the youngest United States chess champion in history, shattering the record formerly held by 20-year-old Paul Morphy. His rise through the ranks was meteoric, and the world began to take notice. Despite this early success, Fischer spent the next decade of his life throwing away opportunities to become world chess champion. He would often not show up to matches if his rigorous demands and rule changes were not met. Fischer wouldn't get a shot at the world title until nearly 15 years after becoming US champion. Many believe this break from the tournament scene would prove to be the end of his career. However, Bobby Fischer's comeback performance in 1970 and 1971 is something that has never been seen before and has never been replicated since. Bobby finished first in an unprecedented 8 consecutive major international tournaments. He went on a 20-game win streak, which propelled him to an undefeated first-place finish in the Candidates tournament. Bobby had finally secured his place as the challenger for the World Chess Championship against reigning champion Boris Spassky. The match took place in 1972 during the Cold War. This wasn't Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky. This was the USA versus the USSR. The political tensions made this World Championship match must-see TV. Spassky got the best of Fischer in Game 1 and picked up a second victory in Game 2 after Fischer forfeited the match. He said all the media attention and cameras were affecting his game. Spassky, being the gentleman that he is, argued with tournament officials on behalf of Fischer to ensure that the match could continue. After all the media was sent home and all the cameras were turned off, Fischer went on to defeat Boris Spassky with a final score of 12.5 to 8.5. Bobby Fischer was finally world chess champion. His first title defense would come 3 years later against Anatoly Karpov in 1975. Bobby Fischer again began making unreasonable demands, and when they were not met, he simply forfeited the title. Bobby Fischer would not play competitive chess again for the next 20 years. There isn't much known about Bobby's life during these later decades. He fell into isolation, joined a doomsday cult, ran into some trouble with the US government, and even had a warrant out for his arrest.
No, I hate chess very much. No, I don't need the money. No, I don't need it. I'll wait. I'll skip it.
So you're not...
I hate chess. I hate chess, really.
You hate chess?
Yeah. I know what chess is all about.
Yeah.
It's all about memorization. It's all about prearrangement.
But
Creativity is lower down on the list.
Bobby Fischer passed away in Iceland at 64 years old. 1 year of life for each square on the chessboard. But can Bobby Fischer really be considered as great as Garry Kasparov, who didn't lose a match his entire life until facing a supercomputer when he was 34 years old? Garry Kasparov was born in the Soviet Union in 1963. He entered chess school at 10 years old, where he learned the Caro-Kann and the Queen's Gambit declined. At 19 years old, Kasparov was already the second-ranked chess player in the world, trailing only Anatoly Karpov, who remained world champion since Fischer forfeited in 1975. A 21-year-old Garry Kasparov would go on to face Karpov at the World Chess Championship of 1984. This 1984 matchup became the first and so far only World Championship match to be abandoned without result. After battling for 5 months, the president of the World Chess Federation cited players' health as a concern and terminated the match. It's reported Anatoly Karpov lost over 10 kilograms or 22 pounds over the course of the match. The rematch would take place just a few months later in 1985. The match was a fixed length, played as a best of 24 games. After 23 games, the score was 12-11 with Kasparov ahead. The 24th game lasted 42 moves, after which Anatoly Karpov reached out his hand to resign. Garry Kasparov was now the youngest ever world chess champion at just 22 years old. Kasparov would go on to defend his title against Karpov the following year in 1986, and he did it again in 1987, and one more time in 1990. From the year 1984 until his retirement from competitive chess in 2005, Kasparov was ranked as the #1 chess player in the world for over 21 years overall. Kasparov also holds the record for the most consecutive professional tournament victories. As I said, Kasparov's first ever loss in a match came against a supercomputer in 1997.
As I already said, losing was painful, physically painful. And the match I lost in 1997 was not the first match I lost to a machine. It was the first match I lost, period.
Yeah.
That's...
oh, wow.
So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's...
Right.
Yeah, that makes all the difference to me.
Yes.
First time I lost.
But can Kasparov really be considered the greatest chess player of all time if he drew Magnus Carlsen when he was just 13 years old? Magnus Carlsen's story begins in Norway. He was born on November 30th, 1990. By 2 years old, Magnus was solving 50-piece jigsaw puzzles, and by 4, he was completing Lego sets meant for children aged 10 to 14. His father introduced him to the game of chess when Magnus was 5, but he initially showed little interest. At the time, Magnus was more interested in memorizing areas, population numbers, flags, and capitals of every country in the world. However, Magnus realized he could use chess to beat his older sisters, and shortly after, he became hooked. Magnus would spend hours analyzing games his father showed him. Magnus's undeniable memory and aptitude for chess at such a young age attracted elite-level coaching. Magnus was being taught by Norway's top-rated player, and at just 9 years old, Magnus Carlsen's rating jumped to over 1,900. In 2004, a 13-year-old Carlsen took place in a blitz tournament in Iceland. There, he defeated Karpov, the former world champion. The next day, in the rapid knockout event, the 13-year-old was paired against Garry Kasparov, the #1 player in the world. Kasparov was fortunate to escape with a draw. Carlsen had a commanding position, but faced time trouble. Magnus would receive his final GM norm the very next month, and at just 13 years old, Magnus Carlsen was officially a grandmaster. Magnus spent the next decade of his life traveling the world and perfecting his craft against the world's best players. In 2013, at 22 years old, Magnus would finally become world champion after defeating Viswanathan Anand 6.5 to 3.5. This, however, was just the beginning. On June 19, 2014, Carlsen won the FIDE World Rapid Championship, which was being held in Dubai. Just 2 days later, he went on to claim the World Blitz Championship, becoming the first player to hold all 3 FIDE-rated time control titles at one time. Since then, only one player has ever held all 3 titles at the same time. It was Magnus Carlsen when he did it again 5 years later in 2019. His peak rating of 2882 is the highest in history. He also holds the record for the longest unbeaten streak at an elite level in classical chess. Magnus was the #1 rated chess player in the world when he was 19 years old, the youngest to ever do so. In 2023, Magnus chose to forfeit his title, citing a lack of motivation to play classical chess. Magnus Carlsen is clearly the greatest chess player to ever live, but he may soon be rivaled by a young, extremely handsome New Yorker who loves to sacrifice the